Our next presentation, our fourth session for today is Press Button, Receive Data, building a one-click tool to track patron questions. And it is being presented by Rebecca Hyams, who is the Web and Systems Librarian and Associate Professor at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, CUNY. For the past 2 years, she's been studying the dark arts of programming in Python and working with various vendor APIs in an attempt to get a better handle on data, develop automations, and solve various workflow problems in the library. I'm going to stop my share now. Thank you for being here, Rebecca, and
Sure. Okay,
whenever you're ready.
all right. Wait, which one of these is actually this one? Okay. Sorry, when you have two monitors and different things. Okay, we are seeing the correct screen now, right? With the full view. Yes. Okay. Awesome.
Looks good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here this morning. I have a long history with SUNYLA, so it's been a while. So I'm happy to be here to share what I think is a cool thing that I built recently to solve a problem in my library. So I'm going to start off by just giving what I call my disclaimer. I am going to be showing a little bit of code here and there, but it's not going to be like a super detailed like how-to program thing. So if you're not a programmer, you should still be able to follow along. I'm not going to get too technical, but I might, have to get a little bit at some points. Hopefully it'll still be clear that you can follow along. And also, I'm not an expert programmer. Again, I've only been at this for like 2 years and have no previous training. So I'm kind of just sharing like the thing that I got to work and like how I got it to work. So let me explain sort of what the problem was that we were having. We know in our library that a lot of what goes on at our circulation desk is just not recorded. We know it gets really busy at different times, and some of that data, some of what goes on at the circulation desk is circulation. It's being recorded in Alma as loans and returns. We have kind of a sense of like when it's busy and when it's not at the desk, but we don't have a way to capture, we didn't have a good way to capture the other types of things that were going on. And the main one being, we know that our circulation desk is a sort of main point of contact for a lot of students with questions, either directions or printers or things like that. And anytime the library is open, the desk is staffed, so there's always someone there. We had tried to use like a paper tally sheet at one point at the circ desk to try to track that. Inevitably, that piece of paper got buried under other pieces of paper, and people couldn't, they forgot it was there, they couldn't find a pen, they forgot about it. And then someone had to take that piece of paper and enter it into like a spreadsheet or something, and it fell apart pretty quickly. So you may be asking yourself, well, don't you have RefAnalytics? And we do have RefAnalytics, and we use it in our library at our reference desk. However, if you've never seen that interface before, it can be very intimidating, especially if you are just recording like directions that you gave to tell someone where the bathroom was. And one of the main differences in our library between our reference desk and our circulation desk is that our circulation desk is mostly staffed by part-time and student workers. We have a couple of full-time staff who are, sort of doing other things, but our main frontline people that are working with patrons coming in are part-timers and student workers, and it's just there's an ever-shifting crew of them throughout the day, throughout the semester, over time. And to get all of them on board, trained, signed in, remembering to do it, and it's this versus our reference desk, like the reference librarians are there for like long shifts. It's not as chaotic. And most of them are people who have been with us for a long time and are used to doing these types of things as a professional librarian. So it's a little bit different. So I was having a conversation with my boss, who's our chief librarian. She runs the show. And she really wanted to get a sense of sort of that additional layer of the work that was being done to help her with staffing and scheduling and budget. And so we were talking, and I was trying to come up with like what I could do to maybe help this situation. So on the screen, actually, I took a shot of my little notebook from when I was talking to her about it from May. And it was basically like, can we come up with something that's really simple and it's just in their face. It's right there. It's super intuitive. You don't need to train. No one needs to sign in or remember like extra steps, and it just collects the data electronically and no one has to go manually entering anything. So it's like, could I do that? Probably. So I sort of started planning. So because I've been doing Python now for a little while, I figured I would use that. That's become my go-to. Um, and at that point, I'd already built a couple of small projects using a Python library called PySimple GUI, which I'll talk a little bit about more on the next couple slides. And then lastly, which I will not go into more detail in this presentation on, is I packaged it up using these libraries, PyInstaller and AutoPy.exe, to just take the Python code I wrote and make it so it could run on other computers that didn't have Python installed. So I'm not going to go into that like magic there, but just know that that is something that is possible, and that's how I actually got it to work on those other computers. So I didn't have to install all these extra things. So I am going to talk a little bit more about PySimple GUI because I feel like that's kind of the magic here. It is a library in Python that allows you to make basic or even more advanced user interfaces. So by default, Python code does not have a user interface. You have to have something sit on top of it. There are other libraries out there that make those user interfaces. Katinker is a really common one, but this one seemed to be the most straightforward, easiest to get going, especially for me as like a novice programmer. And it's very easy to link the press of a button to like actions that happen behind the scenes. So I do have a link on the slide and a QR code that goes to that link up here. And again, the slides will be shared later. So if you missed it, you can go back to it. So in a nutshell, I'm sorry, this is one of the slides with code on it. No one freak out, please. If you're, please don't be intimidated. So you basically set up a window and you can put things more or less in rows. You can have containers with rows in them. And then in there, I have text, I have input, I have buttons, I have like a line separator, very like simple things. And then all of like the properties to like make it look the way I want. And then you give things like buttons and inputs names so that while the code is running, you can, it's looking for something to happen with those elements on the screen. So in the example I have up here, the top image is the code that's actually like the layout of the window. And I have in there a button that's called directions. When that button called directions is pressed, it executes these actions further down in the code where the window is running. And it's like, okay, if the button directions is hit, do these things, make this variable this, do this. So it's very simple to like link those together. So they talk about the first version and some of the commonalities that I've carried forward. And yes, on the screen is this is image I took of our widget, roughly in the type of position it has on the screen. So I built a little widget, what I call a widget, with buttons corresponding to different question categories that are sort of commonly asked at our circ desk. I put a little free text that's optional if someone wants to put extra details, but almost no one ever does. And one of the key things that I did was I took the toolbar off. So by default in PySimple GUI, it'll put a toolbar or, sort of a standard bar you see on the top of most applications, especially in Windows. I got rid of that. I hid it so that it wasn't super obvious to our users how to close it or how to minimize it. There is a secret way to close it that I did not tell any of them about because I don't want them closing it. And then basically when the button is pressed, keeps track of the date time and it enters that data. In the original version, and I'll talk a little bit about what this more, it actually was saving that data to a CSV locally on the machine that I had to then collect. So behind the scenes, I did set these up to launch when a user signs into the computer, because there's constantly people signing in and out throughout the day. I just wanted it to open. No one has to remember to do it. You can just put the shortcut in the startup menu and it launches. And then in the original version, when you launched it, it actually checked if there was a CSV file in the folder that the program lived that matched, like the file name had the month in it, the month and year, and it was looking if that month and year file was there. And if not, it was creating one. So I was having one for each month with the name of the computer so I could keep track of which of the files I had. And then when the button was pressed, it took the timestamp, which button, if there was any extra information, and it wrote it to the CSV file that was living on the computer. So um, that was not the best solution. I had tried to write another script that I could put on each of those computers to send me that file by email once a month, and it never worked. I don't know if it was a security thing or if I didn't write it right. But I never got the email. So I manually had to go to, we have 3 workstations for our part-time staff and then 2 for our full-time staff at the desk. And I had to go to all 5 of them, grab the CSV file, and then I had another script that I could use to take that data and actually put it into RefAnalytics so that we could actually look at it. And I had to remember to go collect the data, and I'm not always on campus in the first place. So the data wasn't updated more than once a month. And so it wasn't super live. It wasn't ideal. So I wanted to fix it and make it better. So I really wanted to move the data recording online so I didn't have to collect a spreadsheet. But I don't have access to it seemed like the most common solution when I talked to people was oh, we'll just have it go, have the file live on a server and collect it from the server. And I'm like, I don't have that. I don't have access to a server to have my files go to make that happen. I'm kind of working within the confines of the existing IT environment. So I go to most times I go to a biweekly Python meetup through Code for Lib, and I asked that group about sort of my problem, and people gave various suggestions that I looked into. So some people suggested Google Sheets, which can be done. The setup is really complicated and it has to be done in such a way that it could potentially expose access to your Google account, based on how you set it up, and it's my Google account, and I did not want to do that. So I was like, all right, Google Sheets is not going to work. Microsoft also had there's some ways to do things through Office 365, which we have, but you had to each user had to authenticate to let it work, and it was they're not going to do that. Even if it's just a one-time thing, they're not all going to do it. And I was like, no, no, no. So the other suggestion, because SpringShare came up, and ideally I would have liked to use RefAnalytics because that's what we have our reference desk data going into. The only problem is that, or the main problem is that there's no API from LibAnswers and RefAnalytics that lets you put data into the system. It only has APIs to take the data out of the system. So, however, it turned out that LibInsight did have an API for that, so I could send data into a data set in LibInsight, even though we don't use LibInsight for anything else. But that was the one place I could see that I could send the data. And it met my criteria for, I could just set it up and let it run. And it was, we didn't have to have each person sign into LibInsight to do it. And the way it was set up, it was that access key, the token, which I'll talk about, was in the code that was then compiled into that exe package. So they couldn't get that token anyway, and it didn't expose any access to anything. So talk briefly just about the LibInsight API. You do have to first set up a data set with the fields that you want in the way that you want it. You also have to then set up, they call it setting up an API. It's kind of a misnomer, I think, but you have to set that up, and then you get a token, and that token helps validate the request. It takes the data, you have to send the data in JSON with specific field names, and those field names have to match. The field names that you currently see on the screen are not actually what they're called in the back data, which you'll see in a second. I could go into way more detail, and it's one of those things once you set it up, you don't need to do it again. But I did link to the SpringShare documentation, and that QR code is the same if you want to look at their documentation on how to set that up. So in the second version of my tool. So it still launches on startup, and when it launches, it just opens. It doesn't need to check for a file, create a file, do any. It just opens and it's just there. And so now, when you press a button, it records which button, which workstation, and then if there was any extra information in that free text entered, and then it formats it in JSON and sends it to LibInsight in real time. The LibInsight dataset is set to add the timestamp when the data is entered. So it just does it on that end. And you can see, so again, I have an example of my code here. and I'm sending the data to my request URL that I got from my LibInsight setup. I blacked out my token, but that's what it looks like. And you see my data payload, that's actually like the JSON data that I am sending. And you can see they have, it's like field 4, field 5, field 7. And those are just like the field names that were assigned when I created the fields in there. So it looks a little weird. And if you were to go do this yourself, your field names might be different. But yeah, basically just takes the data, puts it in those variables in JSON and sends it off, and everything is fine. So despite my best efforts, or despite our best efforts, there are still some challenges, obviously. It's still hard to get consistent data, as in it's hard to get them to remember to enter it consistently. Staff do have to be reminded pretty regularly to keep track, and we know no one's going to be able to capture every single transaction, every single time they give directions or tell someone where a book is. But we're trying to we're getting an approximate, but it's just we have to remind them to do it. The other thing is that the data is in its own little island because we don't use LibInsight for anything else. The RefAnalytics data you can pull into LibInsight is aggregate data, so you can't even really cross-reference it. So you basically have to have that data and then pull it out to look at it in other places. And it does only capture so much. So there are still some limits, but it's better. So with that said, you might be curious, what have you recorded? So this is our data from fall 2024 using the widget. This is the data taken from LibInsight. Our semester started, I think, August 25th. So most of that August is like that last week of August. And then September was busy. And then after that, it's a combination of the library is slightly less busy. At least in terms of people at that point know where the bathroom is and they know how to sign into the computers and use the printer. But we think also like the staff were more likely to forget to do it after like the middle of the semester. So, but it does we do have some data, and I'm just showing it here by month, but I do actually have the hour. I could break it down like by hour, which was something my boss was particularly curious about. And then to put things in perspective, because I was also curious about this, is I wanted to see like sort of in comparison loans and returns and also these questions that are coming in from the widget and sort of tracking them together. And so it was interesting to see like those basically the last week of August and then all of September. It really does, and I could get really granular and show like hour by hour, which I didn't think would show very well on a slide for a presentation. But it does kind of give a sense of like, this is work that's being done and it's valuable and super important work that's being done. And sort of like keep that in mind that it's not just looking at circ data, but it's also looking at sort of other things that are going on that are providing services to our users was really important. So I know I talk really fast. But thank you. I will take questions. I do have, very importantly, I do have my code up on GitHub. The QR code and the link go to the code for that. And I also have my email up in case anyone wants to shoot me any questions. So I'll take questions now.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Rebecca. That is so cool. I really enjoyed seeing that. And I can't wait to just take a look at it all again and dig in. We do have a few questions.
Sure.
And feel free to add more to the Q&A to the folks out there. First question, you mentioned a Code for Lib Python meetup group. How can one
Yes.
join? I'm a member to the list, but haven't heard of it before.
They I was gonna say the easiest thing is there's a Code for Lib. The Code for Lib Slack, there's a channel for it called Python. It's called Python for Lib. I think that's the easiest way. That's I think how I found it. But you could also shoot me an email. I could send you like the meeting link. I think they met this week, so I think they won't be meeting again for another. I don't think they're meeting next week. I think they're meeting the week after, but I might be off. It might be this week. It's like every other Tuesday. They're all like super nice.
Cool, that's great to know. Thank you. Next question. Have you seen a dramatic increase in data records since you've implemented this system?
Ooh, I was like, what do they mean by data records? Just that we have an increase in like usage or an increase in, I'm sorry, what do they?
Yes.
Oh, well, it's hard to tell because we weren't keeping track of those questions before at all. So like, I don't know if necessarily more people are asking questions. It's just now we're actually trying to keep better track of those questions because we knew it was something that was happening. We didn't have the numbers to back it up. We didn't have any numbers to back it up.
All right, thank you. Can you control where the widget opens on the desktop?
Yes. Oh, and I somehow glossed over that, or it's in my documentation. So by default, PySimple GUI always opens in the center of the screen, which is not where you want this to open. I actually have, I got really fiddly with so there's this, if you do look at the code in GitHub, there's a separate configuration file that only has like 3 things in it, and 2 of them are X and Y position on the screen. And it basically uses that to do the adjustment of like where it falls, because I know not everyone's screen resolution is the same. So I tried to, everyone at our circ desk is basically using the default of whatever it is. So I just figured out what that position was on the screen and put those values in as my X and Y for where it should open. But yes, you can control it.
All right, cool. Next question. How did you come up with the categories, directional, printing, etc.? And what types of things would fall under other?
Um, so the categories were basically I mean, I think my boss came up with them. I just said, okay. I mean, we know from being at the desk and talking to the circ staff, like these are the most common things. They ask for directions to rooms and bathrooms. They ask for help with the printer or like where the printer is. Sometimes they ask for help with the Wi-Fi or other technology things. And then they also they're just like, I have this call number, but I don't know where it is on the shelf, and they'll go help them find it. And then other is just kind of any other thing that could possibly come up that's not being captured. I'm not 100% sure how they're using it, and I could probably ask. I think some of it might be like when they get phone calls um, asking about like things related to their like when things are due, or if they could get a renewal, or like, where's this thing, where's that thing. So I think that might be it. But I'm not 100% sure actually how they're using other. I would have to find that out.
All right. Well, thank you. We still have a few minutes for questions if anyone wants to add anything. If not, we can break early, but we'll give it another minute or two. In the meantime, I'll
Sure.
just remind everyone that all of the slides will be from our presenters will be shared today, as well as a link to the conference recording. Additionally, any unanswered questions will be forwarded to presenters, and those answers will be shared. And on top of that, we'll go through the chat and any resources that our attendees have shared in the chat, because chat's been really active with some good, robust conversation, and people have shared things there. So any resources shared in the chat will also be shared out. I'm not seeing any more
Yeah.
questions
I was
coming
like,
in right
Carrie, I
now.
could be your mentor, but I feel like it should go the other way around.
No, you're really doing great work, Rebecca.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back in a
Thanks.
SUNY space. And
I was gonna say your slides look very familiar, Jill.
oh yeah. I some
Appreciate.
you find something that works, you don't deviate. But yeah, it's looking like that's it. So again, thank you so much, Rebecca. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. And I know I'll probably be in touch with a couple follow-up
Sure.
questions. So again, thank you for that. And that is it for now. We now have our lunch break. And